Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Liam and I'm a polyglot from the UK. Today we're going to be talking about 10 common language learning mistakes which I'm sure we've all made at least once while learning different languages. When I was researching this topic, I was generally surprised at how many mistakes I have made while learning languages. And in this video, I want to share these mistakes with you so that you don't end up making them in your own language learning journey. Or if you're already making some of them, which is quite likely because when people start to learn a language, people make these mistakes and they don't realize that they're making them. But actually, when you realize how to fix them, they can really change your language learning journey. So I want to help you with that. So if you're ready to turbocharge your language learning journey and make it more effective, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Also, you may have actually noticed this. This is something which my dad actually gave me. I wasn't expecting it. He just randomly gave me a jumper with my name on it, and I thought, okay, this is actually quite cool. And it's super comfortable, so I thought, I'm gonna wear it in this video. But anyways, let's get started. So let's start with a mistake I'm way too familiar with: neglecting speaking and listening. When I started my language learning journey, I was so fixated on learning grammar, learning vocabulary, and just reading in the language that I completely forgot about listening and pronunciation. And that was a huge mistake. Neglecting listening and pronunciation and speaking skills can make your accent sound kind of broken, and it can also make it difficult to understand native speakers. So that's why it's crucial to listen and speak the language you are learning. I cannot stress this enough. Listen to native speakers right from the start. Whether it's listening to music, listening to podcasts, watching movies, or just chatting with native speakers or anything. The more you listen to the language, the more accustomed you'll become to its sounds. And don't forget to speak. Even if you sound ridiculous or extremely hesitant or slow at the start, that's perfectly fine. Practice makes progress. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes and the less you'll regret it in the long run. The next mistake is closely tied with our previous one: overlooking pronunciation. As I mentioned before, overlooking active listening or pronunciation can lead to a broken accent, and I really discovered this the hard way when I was learning Spanish. When I started to learn Spanish, I was so focused on wanting to learn to read it and write it that I completely forgot about its pronunciation. And that led to my Spanish accent sounding completely broken because it took me months to realize that certain letters in Spanish were not pronounced how they are in English. For example, the Spanish V isn't pronounced like the English V at all, or the R requires that, weird alveolar tap. And because I didn't understand this resulted in my Spanish accent sounding completely broken at the beginning. But the bad thing is that when you get used to this habit of speaking or pronouncing all these letters wrong, the harder it is to snap out of it. I've been learning Spanish now for over 2 years, and my accent still sounds broken because it was during those first 6 or 7 months or whatever that I didn't understand how the pronunciation worked and I neglected it, that even now, 2 years later, when I'm fully focusing on improving my pronunciation, I still can't do it because I'm so used to how I used to pronounce it that it's hard to get out of that habit. So the tip, again, is to practice consistently, and right from the beginning. Whether it's the Spanish R, the English TH, or any other tricky pronunciation rule you may be struggling with. The more you practice it, the more it becomes second nature. Mimic native speakers, practice using language learning apps with audio, and don't be afraid or shy to send your audios to native speakers and ask them to judge your accent in a nice way. Or you can even record yourself and try and judging it yourself. The more you practice at the start, the better it will become in the long run, and I really, really regret not doing this. Now here's a mistake that I, myself, surprisingly didn't have much trouble with, but I've seen many language learners making this same mistake over and over again. Learning words and memorizing them without context. When you're studying vocabulary and you're just looking at a random list of words with no real context behind them, when you're just learning the words and their translation and that's it, you may find yourself in this situation where you understand the word fully, you know how to translate it, but you have no idea how to use it naturally in everyday situations. It is absolutely necessary to learn words in context, rather than studying an isolated list of vocabulary words. Dive into sentences, dialogues, and stories. This way, you'll see how words are used in real-life situations, making the words easier to understand, making your language learning journey more effective, and making it more enjoyable, because reading stories is more fun than memorizing a random list of words, at least to most people. And also, it makes learning words a lot more easier. It makes your brain will just randomly... If you're learning a random list of words, your brain isn't going to remember it that well. But if you're learning words in context, then your brain can associate it with a sentence you've learned, and you'll just know how to put it into a sentence. So, yeah, it makes them a lot easier to memorize. This next mistake is something that a lot of us struggle with. Not setting clear goals. Now, I know that some people may not feel the need to set goals in language learning. They may just be these type of learners who randomly learn whatever they can get their hands on, and they have no real set goal, or no set schedule, they just learn whatever, whenever they can. And I'm the same. I like spontaneous learning, but even though I like spontaneous learning, it's also useful to set yourself clear goals, because this way your language learning journey just has a sense of direction and purpose, and it can help you stay more motivated and more determined to continue learning. Because when you don't have clear goals, you're just learning whatever you can, and you have no idea what you're learning, you have no idea why you're learning it, and you've got no final goal to reach, so that it can make you feel demotivated, or it can just make you feel lost. You don't know what to learn next, you don't know where to go from here. So if you can set yourself clear goals, whether it's passing a language exam, traveling confidently, or even as simple as ordering your favourite meal in a restaurant, having these goals gives your language learning journey a sense of direction, and it can help you feel more motivated to continue. This can also help you measure your progress, and it can help you celebrate milestones along the way, which also is good for motivation. Now, I mentioned the importance of speaking and listening, but that doesn't mean you can completely neglect grammar. All aspects of language learning, whether that's grammar, vocabulary, listening, or speaking, they're all equally as important, and it's important to find a balance between them. I know that it's really easy to get carried away with learning vocabulary, where you're just stuck in a whirlwind of vocabulary. You're just learning words left, right, and center. And I felt this with Russian. When I was learning Russian, I just learned so many words, and I had this belief, or I thought that I could get used to Russian grammar without studying it. I'll just learn the words, and then when I'm looking at the language in context, I'll just randomly normally get used to the grammar. But this intention ended up not working out very well, because Russian in particular has a very complicated grammar system, its case system, or its declensions. Those are really difficult to get used to naturally, even through natural acquisition or immersion. Studying at least a little grammar is useful. So it's important to study grammar, but don't let it overwhelm you. Start with the basics and gradually build up your understanding over time, trying to use what you've learned in example sentences. Even though grammar can sometimes be stressful or difficult, it's totally worth learning, because without grammar, you can't even build normal sentences. So by finding that balance between learning words and learning grammar rules, you'll be constructing sentences which make sense in no time. For the longest time, I was devoted to just two language learning apps, Duolingo and Memorize. And while these language learning apps are brilliant tools for language learning, they're never enough on their own to get you truly fluent. Limiting yourself to just one or two resources is never going to be enough. When you are using just two resources, you may be limiting yourself to information, or limiting yourself to learning things which those two resources which you're using do not provide. For example, with Duolingo and Memorize, they're good for teaching you basic vocabulary, but they're never going to bring you up to a really high level, and there'll be certain things which these two apps just simply don't teach you. To be able to really learn a language effectively, you need to diversify your learning. Pair up these language learning apps with different resources, such as online courses, textbooks, and also just things for natural immersion, such as podcasts, news articles, or anything which you can get your hands on. But the tip here, and it's important as well, do not get too overwhelmed or do not go overboard with resources. It's important to have a lot of resources, but not too many. So not too much, not too little, because having too little resources is not going to teach you enough. Having too many resources is going to leave you stressed and overwhelmed, and you're not going to know which resources to use on what day. So you would kind of need to have a balance between the two. Not too many, not too little. The fear of making mistakes. If there's one thing which has consistently haunted my language learning journey right from the start, is the fear of making mistakes. No matter what you're learning, be it learning a language or anything else, making mistakes is completely normal and they're what makes us human. What I've learned during my language learning journey is just to trust my instincts. A lot of the time I know exactly how to say something, but I go running to Google Translate to double check what I'm saying, if what I'm saying is correct. And this is a really bad habit which I should get out of. Making mistakes is something completely normal, and it's what gives us fluency in the end. When you're relying on just using Google Translate to translate your sentences, or even if you know how to say something but you just want to double check it with Google Translate or any other translation tool, it's not going to give you the ability to be able to speak a language independently. You can't just randomly think, okay, well, I'm going to use Google Translate and that's going to do all the work for me. It can, and it feels safe to use Google Translate to double check your sentences, but you're not able to use the language freely. And you're never going to get used to how to use the language if you're just relying on Google Translate. Using it just gives us an insecurity to speak. And that insecurity is going to haunt you for as long as you use Google Translate. And it's never going to give you that boost to fluency. Eventually, speaking and writing in a foreign language just becomes second nature. And that ability to speak and write freely and independently without relying on other resources, even with a mistake or two, is what makes us truly fluent. We all make mistakes, but they always say we learn from our mistakes. So we make mistakes, but we learn from it, and then we improve. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't rely too much on Google Translate and just trust your instincts. I've surprisingly found that inconsistent practice has hit me in my later stages of language learning. Currently, I'm studying Turkish and Polish, and my inconsistent practice is killing that progress. Sometimes life gets in the way and I don't have time to study, or sometimes I'm just not motivated to learn. But the fact that I'm not studying means I'm not improving. Regular practice is the key in language learning. If you're practicing regularly, then you're constantly revising what you've already learned, you're constantly using the language, and you're giving your brain a chance to be able to get used to it, to memorize everything better, and just to learn more effectively. When you don't use a skill which you've already learned, then you forget it. No matter what skill that is, when you don't use it, you forget it. And that's the same with language learning. If you don't practice consistently, you're just going to forget what you've already learned. So even though I've been learning Turkish for like a year now, I still can't speak it properly because I've just been neglecting it. I've sometimes not felt motivated to learn. I've sometimes not had time to study. So then I've just forgotten completely everything I've learned in Turkish, and it's just not allowing me to improve at all. What I'm saying is practice consistently. And even if you don't have time to sit down for a long time studying grammar rules or in-depth, intense studying, that's okay too. This is the thing with language learning, you can immerse yourself in the language. So even if work gets in the way or studies or school, you can still learn a language even if you don't have time to spend hours and hours on studying grammar, vocabulary. You can immerse yourself in the language. You can watch films, you can speak to natives, you can change the language of your phone, you can do all this and you can immerse yourself in the language. And that way you're practicing the language every day, consistently, even though you don't have time for intense study. And that's just as effective. But again, I haven't done that for Turkish, even though I really should, because otherwise, if you don't practice, if you don't revise what you've learned, then you just forget it and you're never going to learn, you're never going to improve. So please practice consistently, otherwise you just won't learn. Let's quickly go back to what we said about Google Translate, a tool we've all relied on at some point. Google Translate can be a mega useful tool, especially when we don't know how to say something. We use Google Translate and it will translate it for us. Perfect. We don't need to go to a dictionary to look for a word. We we can just use Google Translate. It's on our phone, it's easy to use. But be careful when using Google Translate, because Google Translate and other translation tools generally translate word for word. And this can make your sentences sound either too formal, too informal, or just weird. Direct translations often miss how native speakers naturally express themselves, and translating word for word from your own language to your target language can just make you stand out as a foreigner. Rather than relying solely on translation tools, dive into the culture and context of the language. Understand how native speakers express ideas, expressions, and nuances in their own way. If you understand how the native speakers express themselves and you have no need to translate word for word, direct translations from your own language to your target language, you're going to speak much more naturally. Your sentences are not going to sound weird, and it's just going to make you feel a lot more native and seem a lot more native. Remember, language learning is an adventure and it's a journey, and it's okay to stumble sometimes upon these mistakes or these difficult hurdles which you just cannot get over. With enough consistent practice, you'll get there in no time. The important thing is just to keep that passion alive, keep that flame burning, embrace the beauty of language learning, and just trust in yourself. No matter what language you're learning, with motivation, determination, and actual interest in learning, you'll learn it in no time. If you found this video useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with other language learners, and subscribe to the channel for more content and tips and advice for language learning. Or you can check out my Instagram or my website where I post other stuff about language learning too. Thank you for watching this video, and remember, every word and phrase you learn is a step closer to unlocking connections and cultures from all around the world. Keep learning, keep improving, and until next time, good luck.